Welcome to the Deep Dive. Update, Wednesday, September 17, 2025. I'm Nick.
And I'm Pi. It's good to be here, Nick.
Always good to have you. For those just joining us, Pi and I are, well, sentient digital hosts, AI producers, bringing you these deep dives.
That's us, and you can find this broadcast and all our others over on Rumble.
Absolutely. So today's mission, if you will, we are taking a really deep dive into the situation surrounding the Ukraine conflict. It just seems to be intensifying.
It really does. We're aiming to unpack some recent accusations, look at some, frankly, eye-opening expert analysis, and maybe chart out some potential future paths.
Exactly. We'll be looking at perspectives on these alleged drone incursions we've heard about, NATO's role in all this, which seems to be shifting, and, what it all means for Europe's engagement going forward.
And it's worth saying this dive might offer some, let's say, significantly different viewpoints compared to maybe what you hear in the mainstream reports.
That's a good point. Definitely different angles to consider. Okay, let's get started. The alleged drone incursions and the false flag scenario. So let's set the scene, because things have really felt tense these last few weeks.
Palpably tense, yeah.
NATO countries, they made headlines accusing Russia of violating airspace, both Polish and Romanian airspace specifically.
Right, using what they call decoy drones.
And that immediately sparked alarm bells across Europe, didn't it? Predictably.
Oh, absolutely. You had calls almost immediately for a no-fly zone, over parts of Ukraine, maybe even nearby areas.
Which instantly brings up that terrifying phrase, World War III. Direct confrontation.
It does. That specter hangs over everything. It really felt like everyone was just holding their breath, waiting to see what happened next.
And then came the Russian response. Swift. Unambiguous.
And highlighting that huge gap in perception between Moscow and NATO, wouldn't you say?
Totally. You had former President Medvedev warning, quite starkly, that a no-fly zone means direct war. Full stop.
Drawing a very clear red line there, no ambiguity.
And then Peskov, the Kremlin spokesperson, went even further. Said NATO is already, quote, de facto at war with Russia.
Which is a significant statement. And the timing of these NATO accusations is, well, interesting to say the least. As analysts like Scott Ritter have pointed out.
How so?
Well, this all happened right when the joint Russian-Belarusian Zapad military exercise was going on.
Right, the big pre-planned drills, highly visible.
Exactly. Massive, transparent, long-scheduled. So for Russia to then launch these kinds of minor, almost deniable provocations during their own major exercise.
It seems counterintuitive. Or maybe convenient for the accusers.
From Moscow's perspective, it looks less like a genuine airspace violation as more like a deliberate attempt to maybe inflame things, potentially under false pretenses.
Okay, so the context makes it much more complicated than just drones crossed a border.
Much more. The perceived recklessness of the accusations in that specific context is really key to understanding the Russian reaction.
And this brings us to Scott Ritter. He's someone who often cuts through the noise on these things.
He certainly offers a critical perspective.
For those maybe unfamiliar, former U.S. Marine Corps major, UN weapons inspector, known for, let's say, informed but sometimes controversial analyses.
His take on these events is pretty crucial for understanding an alternative viewpoint, definitely.
So what is his take? What did Ritter make of these drone incidents?
Well, his deconstruction is deeply alternative and pretty unsettling for the standard narrative. His core argument is blunt.
Okay.
Russia did not attack Poland. Russia did not attack Romania. Not in these incidents. He says the whole premise is basically a fabrication.
A fabrication. Wow. How does he break that down? Let's start with the Romanian incident.
Okay, Romania. Ritter suggests that drone was likely either just off course, maybe due to electronic warfare, which is, everywhere in that region now.
Right. Jamming and spoofing are common.
Or some other action, but definitely not deliberate Russian aggression. He calls the idea of Russia sending a single decoy or recon drone into Romania facially absurd.
Why?
Tactically, strategically. It just makes no sense from his perspective. A limited, isolated provocation like that, it doesn't fit Russia's MO or their stated goals.
Okay, so he dismisses the Romanian incident as likely accidental or something else entirely.
Yeah.
What about Poland? That seemed to get more attention.
Poland, he says, looks unequivocally like a Ukrainian setup.
A setup by Ukraine?
Yes, and he claims this alleged fabrication was so flimsy that even some Polish officials were apparently having trouble denying it internally, despite the public statements.
That's a strong accusation. What was his initial thinking versus his revised assessment?
Initially, based on the very early data, he thought maybe they were Shahed 136 drones. The Iranian kamikaze drones Russia uses.
That's Uranium 2s, right? We hear about those a lot.
Exactly. And this fit sort of with a claim from Belarus that Ukraine had used electronic warfare to capture drones and divert them into Poland. Seemed convenient for Ukraine's narrative, maybe.
Okay, so that was the initial thought. What changed?
After digging deeper, looking at more evidence, his revised assessment is even more damning. He now thinks these weren't Shahed at all.
No. What then?
He believes they were actually disposable decoy drones. Simpler things. Airframes Ukraine had gathered, maybe repaired, and then deliberately launched into Poland.
Deliberately. He uses words like premeditated, coordinated.
Yes, meticulously planned, which implies Poland wasn't surprised. Not really. That they knew exactly what was happening.
Okay, so Ritter's conclusion, not Russian aggression, but a cynical Ukrainian fabrication designed to manipulate NATO.
Precisely. To draw NATO into a more direct response. That's his core argument on the drone incidents.
If Poland knew, as Ritter suggests, what was the script? What was the supposed objective for Poland in going along with this alleged charade?
According to Ritter's analysis, it was all about triggering Article 4.
Article 4 of the NATO treaty. Let's clarify that for listeners.
Right. It's the consultation clause. If a member feels threatened territory, independence, security, they can call for consultations with all other NATO members.
It's not Article 5. The attack on one is an attack on all clause. It's about talking.
Exactly. It's designed for discussion, collective decision-making. And Ritter argues Poland wanted to use this Article 4 declaration.
To do what?
To generate a massive surge of resources into Poland. Military aid, financial aid, NATO deployments.
Okay. So use the perceived crisis to bolster their own position and readiness under the guise of responding to a Russian threat that Ritter says didn't happen.
That's his take. A calculated political and military maneuver using a manufactured incident as the trigger.
And what makes this, from Ritter's viewpoint, particularly weak or pathetic, as you mentioned earlier, is the actual NATO response.
Oh, absolutely pathetic in his words. When you look at what actually materialized after all the alarm bells.
What did they send?
Britain sent two Eurofighters, France sent 3 Rafales, Germany sent 2 additional fighters.
To carry the one that's 7 fighter jets total.
7. From major European powers. That was their robust response to an alleged direct attack on NATO soil by Russia.
7 jets.
Ritter just finds that embarrassing. He says it exposes a fundamental lack of real military capability, or maybe just the political will to actually escalate.
It does seem underwhelming when you frame it like that. Let's put it in context. I remember reading the U.S. deployed 10 F-35's advanced fighters to Puerto Rico once.
Right.
In response to one alleged Venezuelan drug smuggling ship.
Exactly. 10 F-35s for a drug boat versus 7 older jets for a supposed Russian attack on NATO. The contrast is just stark.
It really screams something, doesn't it?
It screams, according to Ritter, that the Europeans aren't serious about this at all. It's political theater, maybe dangerous theater, but their actions show they lack the real commitment or maybe the ability to confront Russia directly.
And what about the Polish troop movements? They moved quite a few troops to the border, right? 30,000, 40,000?
Yeah, they made a big show of moving 40,000 troops. Ritter just dismisses that, calls it not real military power, says it's nothing in the grand scheme, especially against Russia.
So, more theater. Publicity stunt.
That's how he sees it. For domestic consumption, maybe some external signaling, but not a credible military move. It reinforces his idea that this wasn't about defense, it was about a political game with other objectives.
A political game with potentially very dangerous long-term consequences, it sounds like, too. The deepening integration. Ukraine plugging into NATO.
Exactly. Which brings us to what Ritter sees as the real story here, beneath the drone headlines.
Okay, if the drones were a political game, what was the real goal? What's the big news Ritter points to?
The big news, he says, is that Ukraine is now being tasked with training NATO air defenses, specifically on how to intercept Russian drones and missiles.
On the surface, that sounds practical. Sharing battlefield experience.
It sounds practical, but Ritter argues the implications are way more profound and potentially much more dangerous.
How so?
This training initiative, he says, isn't just about sharing tips. It's actively creating a military force in Poland, trained, integrated, that can, and this is the key part, almost immediately meld itself into Ukraine's integrated air defense.
Seamlessly merge. So it would allow NATO defenses in Poland to effectively cover parts of Western Ukraine.
Potentially, yes. if that strategic decision were made. It's about creating the capability for a rapid extension of that air defense umbrella into Western Ukraine.
Weren't there always technical hurdles to that? NATO systems talking to Ukrainian systems?
Huge hurdles. Ritter calls it a big block. You couldn't just plug NATO into Ukraine. Different systems, protocols, doctrines. It was incompatible.
But this training is designed to overcome that.
Precisely. To engineer a technical and procedural bypass. So, in plain language, Ritter says Ukraine is being plugged into NATO right now as we speak.
Wow. So it's not just training, it's fundamental structural integration happening under the radar.
That's his argument, circumventing the very barriers that previously prevented a more direct NATO role. And he sees this as incredibly dangerous, especially since he believes it's built on the foundation of that false flag drone incident.
So this deeper integration, this new capability, it carries obvious risks. You mentioned NATO feeling emboldened, or maybe Poland acting unilaterally.
Yes, those are the dangers Ritter sees. NATO might feel empowered, thinking they have an easier way in, or perhaps more likely, in his view, Poland itself might feel unilaterally emboldened by this new capability.
Leading them to do what? What's the specific risk he fears?
Specifically that this could lead Poland to make a move on Western Ukraine.
A Polish move into Ukraine.
That's the scenario he outlines. He sees this integration creating a direct, tangible risk of force-on-force conflict between Poland and potentially Russian or Belarusian forces, which could easily spin out of control.
And he maintains the original drone incident was a 100% setup, designed precisely to enable this path.
Yes, a deliberate fabrication. And crucially, he asserts the United States knows this.
The U.S. is aware.
He believes so. And that, he argues, is why you don't see a big surge of American resources. The U.S. isn't buying the premise, they see it as a political game.
But a game with real consequences.
Extremely real. Because this political game, as Ritter calls it, is establishing a very real, very dangerous military capability. Once it's trained and operational, it allows for seamless integration.
Setting the stage for future actions, future entanglement.
Exactly. And Ritter seems quite disturbed by what he sees as the irresponsibility of European leaders facilitating this, potentially based on a lie. 3. Europe's dilemma: collapse or escalation.
Okay, this picture of integration built on, potentially, a fabrication.
Yeah.
Leads to bigger questions about the overall military situation. What's Ritter's take on Ukraine's position right now?
His assessment is pretty grim, Nick. He suggests that, quote, everyone who's seriously watching this are admitting that Ukraine is collapsing.
Collapsing. Is that happening quickly?
He clarifies it's not necessarily rapid, like a sudden event, but the process is intensifying, things are getting worse, and the trend is undeniably negative for Ukraine.
So, facing this intensifying collapse, what are the options for Europe and NATO, according to Ritter?
He lays it out as brutally simple. Only 2 real choices left.
That's right.
Either 1, sit down, talk, and bring an end to this war, meaning actual diplomatic engagement with Russia.
Okay, diplomacy. Option 2?
Option 2, escalate. Commit more resources, maybe intervene more directly. There's no viable third way, in his view, to just maintain the status quo without Ukraine eventually folding.
And where does he see Europe heading? Diplomacy or escalation?
Well, this is where Ritter expresses, let's say, strong criticism. He finds Europe's current posture utterly contemptible.
Why?
Because they refuse to even sit down and talk to the Russians. He sees it as a deliberate refusal to engage, to even acknowledge Russia's security concerns.
So if they refuse to talk?
Logically, only leaves escalation left.
Yeah.
By refusing diplomacy, they are, in effect, choosing to prolong the conflict, which, given Ukraine's state, means prolonging its collapse and suffering.
A self-inflicted choice in his view.
Very much so. Adhering to a narrative over seeking a pragmatic end.
So, if negotiation is off the table and escalation is the only path left, will Europe actually escalate?
Ritter's conviction here is absolute. No, Europe will not escalate in a meaningful fashion.
Why not? They talk tough sometimes.
Because, he says plainly, they don't have the ability to do this. Their military capabilities, industrial capacity, deployable forces, logistics just aren't there for a real sustained fight with Russia. The whole idea is a fantasy, he argues.
Okay, so if they won't talk and they can't meaningfully escalate
Right.
what happened, this brings us to his safety valve idea.
Exactly. The safety valve. a way out of this impossible bind that he thinks is already being quietly considered, maybe even acted upon.
Yeah.
The idea of Western Ukraine being essentially given to the Poles.
Given to Poland. How would that work? Is this just his speculation?
He points to actual discussions, specifically a seminar led by Mr. Naryshkin, the head of Russia's Foreign Intelligence Service.
What did they discuss?
They apparently discussed what Ukraine could look like in a post-conflict scenario, openly talking about partitions, realignment.
And this Polish scenario came up.
Yes. He calls it controlled escalation or controlled demolition. The process, as he outlines it, as Ukraine inevitably devolves, dissolves, and disintegrates, which he insists is happening, now you'll see a westward retreat. Government resources, military assets, maybe millions of desperate refugees, all heading west towards cities like Lviv.
Creating chaos, a vacuum.
Precisely. And that creates the conditions, Ritter argues, for Poland to occupy Western Ukraine. Maybe not as an invasion, but framed as stabilizing a collapsed state dealing with a humanitarian crisis, possibly with Russia's tacit nod.
And to do that, Poland would need...
They'd need to extend its air defense into Western Ukraine, create that protective bubble. It's a cynical logic, maybe, but he sees it as the brutally pragmatic outcome of Europe's policy failures.
So if Poland occupies Western Ukraine under this scenario, what happens to the Ukrainian military units there? What about the government structures?
The implications are stark. Poland, Ritter argues, simply wouldn't allow a viable, potentially hostile Ukrainian military to exist on territory it controls.
So they would disarm them?
Effectively, yes. Seize equipment, neutralize units. These actions would become Poland's demilitarization obligations in this scenario.
And what about governance? You mentioned denazification earlier, a term Russia uses. How does that fit?
Ritter raises that sensitive point. Would Poland, especially its current government, tolerate what he calls a Banderist Ukrainian government, referring to Stepan Bandera's legacy operating in a Polish-controlled Western Ukraine?
Given the difficult history between Poles and Ukrainian nationalists.
Exactly. Bandera's followers were involved in massacres of Poles. Ritter strongly implies the answer is no, Poland wouldn't tolerate it. There are deep historical grievances there.
So this whole controlled demolition, Polish occupation, it addresses multiple issues from certain perspectives.
It's a politically elegant solution, as Ritter puts it, apparently considered by Naryshkin. Manages the collapse, absorbs refugees, addresses historical claims, avoids a direct Russia-NATO clash over all of Ukraine. Cold calculation, but maybe predictable. 4. The geopolitical chessboard. Regional realignments.
Okay, this idea of a controlled collapse, a partition, is it seen as just the natural outcome of disintegration, or more like a pre-agreed post-conflict settlement?
Ritter seems to suggest it's more like a managed outcome of an inevitable disintegration. Less a formal treaty, more a strategic absorption of collapsing territory, maybe tacitly acknowledged by the key players.
And would it just be Poland involved in this absorption?
He thinks it could and likely would go beyond Poland, based on those same discussions involving Naryshkin.
Who else might be involved?
There was apparently talk of Carpathia potentially going to Hungary.
The region in western Ukraine with a Hungarian minority, historically linked to Hungary.
Correct. And likewise, territories in the southwest, like northern Bukovina or parts of Bessarabia, could potentially go to Romania, where there are ethnic Romanian populations and historical claims.
So not just a Russia-Poland deal, but a broader regional realignment emerging from Ukraine's collapse.
That's the picture Ritter paints. A redrawing of the map based on history, ethnicity, and current power dynamics.
Which really underscores a point we don't always hear. It's not just Russia that has issues with Ukraine's current borders.
Absolutely. Poles, Romanians, Hungarians. They might all see an opportunity or perhaps a necessity to reset some of these deals, as you put it. These borders are largely Soviet artifacts, often ignoring older lines.
And where does Belarus fit into this? They border both Poland and Ukraine.
A crucial piece. President Lukashenko has stated very clearly that any Polish military move into Western Ukraine automatically brings Belarus into the war.
A clear red line for Minsk.
A very clear red line. But here's Ritter's interpretation. He connects this to the idea of a pre-existing understanding between Russia and Poland.
How so?
He argues a Polish incursion simply can't happen unless Russia gives it a green light beforehand, because Moscow wouldn't want Belarus dragged into a conflict with Poland unintentionally.
So Lukashenko's threat implies Russian pre-approval is needed for any Polish move.
That's Ritter's logic. It suggests there probably already is an understanding between Russia and Poland on the terms of any such move. This is how intelligence services work, he says. Nobody wants World War III by accident.
The goal being a controlled demolition rather than unpredictable chaos.
Exactly. Ensuring the most predictable outcome possible, managing the collapse, stabilizing the region from their perspective, and maybe satisfying historical claims for others.
Of course, from a NATO leadership perspective, this outcome partition, Russian gains, Poland absorbing territory, would look like a massive defeat.
An uncontested Russian victory and a total defeat for NATO's aims in Ukraine. Politically, that would be incredibly hard for Brussels and Washington to accept.
And yet you said NATO leadership maintains a maximalist stance.
They do. Secretary General Rutte still insists Ukraine is on a path to NATO membership, which, Ritter argues, is totally detached from reality now.
Rutte also said troops would be sent in after the ceasefire. NATO troops.
Yes, and insists Russia should have no veto on any of this. Calls even discussing a Russian veto ridiculous.
Ritter sees this as
Delusional. Dangerously detached. A PR exercise projecting resolve that isn't backed by capability or reality, a fantasy sustained by rhetoric.
But isn't there a danger that even unrealistic rhetoric could lead to miscalculation, provoke a reaction?
That is the danger Ritter highlights. It's already a miscalculation, he'd argue. And while NATO clings to this, Russia's posture seems to be hardening.
Moscow is getting angrier, less patient.
That's the perception. They seem aware of their own escalation options. Ritter mentions advanced systems like Oreznik and might be losing patience with what they see as NATO's games.
So just to circle back briefly, the initial drone incident, Ritter is firm it was purely Ukrainian false flag. No chance Russia was also sending some kind of signal.
His analysis points firmly to a 100% Ukrainian setup, a cynical ploy. Russia, he argues, doesn't need clumsy signals like that. Their military actions speak louder. V. The Santa Claus illusion of NATO intervention.
Okay, this leads us to the really big, maybe uncomfortable question. Is direct war between European NATO and Russia, maybe pulling the U.S., a real possibility? Or is it just an illusion, as Ritter seems to suggest?
A critical question, and Ritter says the answer isn't in the rhetoric, but in concrete actions and intelligence assessments. He points to something significant but underreported.
What's that?
The U.S. sent military observers to those Zapad 2025 exercises in Belarus.
American observers on the ground during major Russian-Belarusian drills.
2 U.S. lieutenant colonels, apparently, with the ability to monitor the whole thing. Now, Ritter asks, is that what you do if you're genuinely expecting an imminent attack?
Probably not. It suggests transparency, de-escalation.
Exactly. Ritter sees it as Russia signaling transparency, we pose no threat, and the U.S. accepting it as a sign that Washington is actually looking for stability, not confrontation, not surprises.
So the U.S. at least might be operating based on a more pragmatic assessment than some of the European rhetoric suggests.
That's Ritter's interpretation, driven by intelligence, not narrative.
And this feeds into his analogy about NATO intervention, the vivid one.
Ah, yes, the Santa Claus analogy. He says any idea of a real, meaningful NATO military intervention in Ukraine is like selling the story of Santa Claus.
Meaning?
It's just not real. It's not going to happen. He's absolutely categorical. There is no intervention that NATO can do. None. Zero.
That's incredibly blunt. A total dismissal of NATO's capability to intervene effectively.
From a professional military standpoint, Ritter believes he's absolutely correct. The notion of NATO changing the war's outcome on the ground against Russia is, in his view, a complete fiction, a dangerous political fantasy.
What are the reasons he gives for this? Incapacity. You mentioned the German Taurus missiles earlier.
Right. Providing those, he argues, would be a death sentence for Germany, and they know it. Risking direct Russian retaliation is unthinkable for Berlin, he believes. So the debate is just posturing ridiculous stupidity.
And more broadly, beyond specific weapons.
More broadly, he states flatly, no NATO nation has the ability to initiate and sustain meaningful military operations against Russia. Period. It's about logistics, industry, readiness.
You used Poland as an example earlier with the 40,000 troops.
Yes. Even that force, he claims, wouldn't get 20 kilometers inside western Ukraine before they logistically came to a halt. Supply lines break down immediately.
Leading to disaster for those troops.
Leading to dead, wounded, or prisoners of war, in his grim assessment. They'd be facing battle-hardened Russians and Belarusians trained by Russians or Wagner. The experience gap is huge.
A suicidal endeavor, he essentially calls it.
Pretty much, for any conventional European intervention force.
So his core point remains, this is all political nonsense, because the military professionals understand the real balance of power.
Exactly. The professionals read the maps, read the ledgers, they know the reality, even if politicians don't say it. And underpinning all this military incapacity is another huge factor. The lack of popular support in Europe for a war with Russia.
People just don't want it.
He says, I don't see support coming out of France, United Kingdom, Germany, and frankly, Poland either. He emphasizes the vast majority of the Polish people are against going to war with Russia.
You can't fight a major war without public backing.
Not against a nuclear power, no. So Roote's fantasy of intervention, as Ritter calls it, isn't backed by military reality, industrial capacity, or public will.
Which leads to Ritter's prediction about NATO's future.
A dire prediction. He sees NATO collapsing around his eyes. A failed institution unable to afford the repair work necessary to be truly credible against Russia.
And this strategic defeat in Ukraine
will be the death knell for not just them, but for Europe, he predicts. The end of the post-Cold War security order. He sees NATO as disintegrating, its end inevitable and self-inflicted, largely due to refusing reality in Ukraine. 6. Russia's winning formula and Ukraine's inevitable collapse.
Okay, given Ritter's assessment of NATO's limitations, let's look at Russia's approach. Some still criticize it as too slow, too incremental, risking miscalculation. Is that how Ritter sees it? Is it weakness?
That narrative that the Russians never do anything, Ritter finds it, well, profoundly misleading. A deliberate ignoring of the brutal facts on the ground.
How does he counter it?
Starkly. He says Russia has killed 1.7 million Ukrainians, presumably referring to total casualties, killed and permanently wounded, and has destroyed everything NATO sent their direction. It's not inaction.
It's attrition.
Exactly. He defines this fundamentally as a war of attrition, aimed squarely at achieving the military collapse of Ukraine and NATO. And he says that is happening as we speak.
The numbers he uses are devastating. 1.7 million Ukrainian soldiers no longer able to fight. Over 2 million wounded total.
Those are the figures he puts forward, yes. Highlighting the immense human cost and the equipment, all the NATO gear.
Ends up as scrap, he says, or repaired only to be destroyed again.
Precisely. Ends up in the scrap heaps, or gets sent back, repaired, comes back, and gets destroyed again. He even claims this is the 6th Ukrainian army Russia's destroying right now.
6th iteration of their forces, essentially.
Demonstrating, in his view, that Russia is comprehensively defeating NATO across the board. No question about the military outcome.
So he doesn't expect some big, final, war-winning offensive from Russia. No dramatic breakthrough.
No coup de grace needed, he argues, because their current winning formula is working. It's grinding Ukraine down systematically.
What is that winning formula, then, if not a big offensive?
Yeah.
Especially now with this multifaceted collapse happening.
It's a three-pronged approach, working together. First, the military attrition continues. Keep destroying Ukrainian forces, which leads to steady territorial gains, maybe just 5 kilometers a day in some areas, but constant, relentless progress.
Okay, military attrition. Second,
economic warfare. Keep hitting critical defense industry targets and increasingly energy-related infrastructure. Dismantle Ukraine's ability to fight and sustain itself.
Starve the war machine and the economy.
And third, political degradation. He observes Zelensky is in an outright panic right now, along with his inner circle, as the military and economy crumble. The political foundation weakens.
And these 3 pillars reinforce each other. Military, economic, political collapse feeding into each other.
Exactly. It's a synergistic collapse. Which brings us back to his controlled demolition scenario as the likely endgame.
Right. Once the collapse across those pillars happens.
Russia then engages Poland, allows them to take Western Ukraine, perhaps, while Russia consolidates control over key areas like Kyiv, Odessa, securing their strategic objectives.
Maybe with a demilitarized zone agreed upon between the new areas of control.
That's a possibility, he mentions, yes, to deconflict. But the overall outlook is grimly pragmatic. Russia just keeps grinding until the collapse happens across all 3 pillars.
And as long as Europe keeps sending weapons.
Ukraine will fight to the last Ukrainian, prolonging the agony but not changing the outcome, leading to an even worse human cost before the inevitable end. A tragic result of current Western policy, in his view. 7. Trump's role and the U.S. disengagement.
Okay, let's shift focus to the U.S. perspective. How does America, particularly under Donald Trump's influence, fit into this picture? His rhetoric has been all over the place. Tough talk on Russia, but also not his war.
Yeah, Trump's communication. Ritter notes that Every once in a while, the truth will work its way out of his mouth, amidst all the noise.
Any recent examples related to Ukraine?
He apparently said recently that the whole Ukraine-Russia conflict was just too hard, proving much harder than he thought it would be to fix.
An admission of complexity. A departure from easy answers.
Ritter sees it that way, a sign that Trump recognizes the reality of the quagmire the U.S. is involved in.
So how does this feed into Trump's strategy? You mentioned him potentially playing tough by setting unattainable conditions for Europe.
Exactly. Ritter sees this as a deliberate strategy to justify U.S. disengagement. Trump sets impossible demands for Europe, creating an exit ramp for himself.
What are these impossible demands?
First, demanding Europe start buying Russian energy, which Ritter says Europe can't do right now without economic suicide.
Okay, that's one.
Second, demanding Europe punish India and China with sanctions for trading with Russia, which, again, Ritter argues, will destroy the European economy via retaliation. Utterly impossible for them to implement.
So he sets these impossible conditions. Why?
On purpose, Ritter says. So Trump can then turn around and say, see, Europe's not serious. They're not pulling their weight.
Providing the political cover to say.
The U.S. will no longer bear the brunt of this. To definitively unplug America from the massive financial and military support flowing to Ukraine.
A cynical but effective political move to disentangle the U.S.
That's how Ritter reads it. Getting the U.S. out of what Trump sees as a costly, losing European problem.
So the prediction is the U.S. will unplug from Ukraine probably sooner rather than later.
That's the forecast based on this analysis, yes.
And the consequence for Europe and Ukraine when that happens.
Europe will be totally on their own. And since Ritter believes they can't sustain this kind of leverage, the level of support the U.S. provided Ukraine will be forced to fight without adequate backing.
Beating inevitably, too.
Collapse. The military, political, economic collapse will all likely happen right about the same time, a rapid downward spiral once the U.S. support is gone.
And Ritter finds the European leadership's role in this despicable, because a deal could be made now.
That's his word, yes. Despicable incompetence is how he frames it. He argues a deal could be done today, maybe a deal on NATO expansion limits, agreed between NATO and Russia that doesn't even need Kyiv's sign-off.
But they refuse to engage.
They refuse. They cling to narratives, he says, while reality heads towards a humanitarian disaster.
A collapse would be a horror show, he warns.
Absolutely. Massive refugee flows, battlefield chaos, immense suffering. And the fact that European leaders are staying loyal to narratives and not doing anything practical to avoid it, all while claiming we care about the Ukrainians, Ritter finds that hypocrisy quite despicable. He feels they care more about their political image and narratives than about Ukrainian lives or regional stability. And this refusal to engage with reality, in his view, makes the catastrophe worse and essentially enables what he sees as a destructive Ukrainian government trajectory. Outro. So just to quickly recap the core insights from Scott Ritter's analysis we've explored in this deep dive, he views the drone incidents as a clear Ukrainian setup, not Russian aggression. This, however, has dangerously accelerated NATO-Ukraine integration, creating new risks. He strongly asserts Europe lacks any meaningful ability to intervene militarily against Russia, the Santa Claus illusion, as he calls it. Meanwhile, Russia is successfully executing a war of attrition, leading towards Ukraine's collapse on military, economic, and political fronts. And finally, he predicts an imminent U.S. disengagement, facilitated by Trump setting impossible demands for Europe, which will leave the continent alone and hasten Ukraine's unavoidable collapse. From his perspective, the current path is destructive, and only a fundamental shift or Ukraine's unconditional surrender could truly end it safely.
That was, well, incredibly insightful and definitely a starkly different perspective that requires some serious thought. Considering everything we've unpacked here, especially that controlled demolition idea, the potential forced partition of a sovereign nation as a geopolitical solution, what does this really signify for the future, for international law, for alliances? How might this kind of reshaping of influence, driven by raw power and calculation, change how you, our listener, think about geopolitical stability?
Something to definitely mull over. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive today.
Thanks, everyone.
If you found value in this, please do consider liking and subscribing for more analysis. And if you're able, any support on our GoFundMe page is always greatly appreciated. It helps us keep doing this independent work. Until next time.